Economic disruptions from COVID-19 are raising questions about how extensive foreign ownership of ag land, processing plants, and other food production assets might be. Roger McEowen with the Washburn University School of Law joins us now for a further look. Thanks for joining us, Roger. Let's start with some background on the restrictions on foreign ownership of ag land. Can you bring us up to speed on how that works? Okay, it appears as though we're having a little bit of technical difficulty getting Roger on the line, so we're going to move on. Economic disruptions from COVID-19 are raising questions about how extensive foreign ownership of ag land, processing plants, and other food production assets might be. We got him on the phone. Roger McEowen with the Washburn University School of Law. So glad we can have this discussion, Roger. Let's start with some background on the restrictions.
Well, good to be with you, Christina. And actually, these restrictions go back quite a long time. It goes back to the Old English common law. And the common law in England, that rule existed until it was abolished by statute in 1870. But by that time, the notion of limiting alien ownership of ag land was well embedded in the United States. And in the 1970s, the issue of foreign investment in and ownership of ag land received additional attention then because there were several large purchases by foreigners, and the suspicion that the buildup in liquidity in the oil exporting countries would likely lead to more land purchases by non-resident aliens really alerted the Congress. And so we got a law in 1978 addressing it.
Okay, now this is becoming a sticking point right now. Talk about the concern over foreign ownership and why this issue is all of a sudden bubbling up amidst the pandemic.
Well, it's an issue that's been there for a number of years, but because this virus originated in China, and China is a major player in ag in this country, I think you've got those two things combined that has really kind of poured gasoline on this. Syngenta, for example, in agrochemicals and seeds is a subsidiary of ChemChina. Smithfield is a subsidiary of the WH Group of China. And so China, through that, basically controls 33 food processing plants in the United States, and 25% of all hogs produced in this country are run through a China-owned processing facility. And you've got international ownership of ag land. That the land itself is now owned by foreigners to the extent of 2%. So it's a big concern in agriculture.
Wow, 2%. What would you say is the big takeaway here, and what do you expect to see surrounding this going forward, especially as we get to the other side of this pandemic?
Well, I think the big takeaway, a couple of things. We've got basically one state that has a major restriction at the state level, and that's Iowa. That's the most restricted limitation on non-resident alien ownership of any state in the United States. They've made a policy decision that they're going to protect that resource, the food supply, from ownership by anyone outside the country that may not be our friend. It's going to be an issue for the Congress to deal with. Again, I think it'll cycle back. Senator Grassley has, a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, proposed some legislation. But I would say the takeaway is keep in mind, data shows us that about 2/3 of all agricultural land is going to change hands somehow over the next decade to 15 years. Where that land goes and where these processing plants goes and these seed companies go, that's going to be continue to be a big issue.
Absolutely. It will shape the future of the industry. Thank you so much for joining us. Always look forward to our conversations. Roger McEowen with the Washburn University School of Law.